Today we'll be looking through all the different generations of Pokémon games. Over the years, I've talked about the series only a handful of times, but like a lot of people, I'm actually a big fan of the series, so I think it's about time I did another video. Besides, that guide I did about transferring Pokémon through the generations a couple years back is still one of the most watched videos on the channel, so obviously someone likes it when I talk about this stuff. So what we'll do is go through each of the 7 generations, discuss the evolution of the series throughout the years, and see what makes each gen unique. And then I'll let you know my opinion at the end. Then I'll upload it to YouTube. That sounds like a good idea. And before we start, keep in mind that we're discussing the main Pokémon series released in the West. And because we're going to be looking at so many games, I'm also not able to mention every single feature or change, so keep that in mind. Okay, let's get started. Generation 1. This is where it all began. Pokémon Red and Blue arrived to the North American market in 1998 for the Game Boy. And while the games have evolved considerably over the years, the standard gameplay formula is still the same today, pretty much anyways. In essence, Pokémon functions like a traditional JRPG. You have a party of up to 6 Pokémon, and you run around an overworld dotted with towns and caves. Of course, you've got the gyms, which act like boss battles of sorts, and everything builds up to the grand finale where you battle the Elite Four. The different Pokémon types are the equivalent of the familiar elemental system you see in a lot of games. Of course, the thing that makes Pokémon really stand out are the Pokémon itself. There's so many different types of Pokémon to collect, plus many of them can evolve, and of course there's the trading as well. As we all know, each Pokémon version has their own set of Pokémon, and in order to collect all of them, you need to trade. I think that's what really made the games popular. Pokémon Yellow came out a year later. This version of the game has been made to resemble the anime, so instead of being able to choose Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle as a starter, you can only have Pikachu. Pikachu follows you around, which is pretty cool. Other than that, there are some alterations to the storyline, gameplay, and sprites compared to Red and Blue, as well as Game Boy Color enhancements, but nothing that makes the game completely different. All these 3 games have been released digitally for the 3DS with wireless trading and Pokémon Bank support, which is pretty cool. Gen 1 lacks a lot of basic features and elements which make these games feel a bit primitive compared to even the 2nd gen, but for a lot of people, Red and Blue and Yellow are the most nostalgic, which is reason enough to play them anyways, as far as I'm concerned. Generation 2. In 2000, a new generation of games were released, Pokémon Gold and Silver for the Game Boy Color. Now, this generation was quite the upgrade. Let me just get the list. A new region called Johto, in addition to the old Kanto region, which can be accessed later in the game, complete with their gyms, which makes the game essentially twice as long. 100 new Pokémon, which is a pretty substantial increase. The games now feature a time system. Dark and Steel types were added, as well as changes to expand and balance gameplay. Pokémon now have genders and can be bred. Shiny Pokémons were added in. A friendship system, which actually existed in Yellow, was implemented for all the Pokémon instead of just Pikachu. The ability to hold items during battle, and new Pokéballs among many other things. As you can tell, that's a lot of improvements. I'm not surprised when I hear people say that this is their favorite generation. Personally, I don't see anything the Gen 1 games do better. Everything was improved upon. The only thing I don't like is that they changed the Lavender Town music. In 2001, the 3rd Gen 2 game was released, Pokémon Crystal. Like how it is with the Yellow version, Crystal featured some gameplay and story changes, but still remains very similar to Gold and Silver. One of the most noteworthy things about Crystal is that it was finally possible to play as a girl. There are also other visual enhancements like animated sprites and story additions. And like the previous gen, Gold and Silver was also released on the 3DS, but Crystal wasn't, and I'm not really sure why, to be honest. Generation 3. In 2003, the Pokémon franchise moved on to the Game Boy Advance with the release of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire. The GBA's extra horsepower meant that Pokémon games now started resembling Super Nintendo RPGs in terms of visuals. Ruby and Sapphire take place in a new region. Hoenn is certainly smaller than the combined size of Johto and Kanto, which is why some people thought of it as a downgrade, but I didn't really perceive it that way. Hoenn feels quite a bit different in its layout, and I like the fact that there's a lot of waterways to traverse. It gives traveling some variation, which in turn makes everything feel a bit more like an adventure, I guess. Gen 3 added even more Pokémon. 135 to be exact. Also new were abilities, natures, more Pokeballs, double battles, and the Pokemon contests. Something I didn't think I'd like would be the Pokemon contests, but I ended up really digging them because it ended up being another thing you can do outside of battle. One problem with Ruby and Sapphire was the fact that it wasn't possible to transfer Gen 1 and 2 Pokemon into the game, and a lot of Pokemon from previous generations were not available in the wild. Thankfully, that was fixed a year later with the introduction of Firered and Leafgreen, which are remakes of the Gen 1 games. Those games brought the unattainable Pokemon into Gen 3 and reimagined the old Gen 1 games with all the new enhancements from the newer games. Also new was wireless trading. Only Firered and Leafgreen had wireless trading though. In 2005, Pokemon Emerald was released, which was the third game to Ruby and Sapphire, and that added a few more alterations like multi-battles outside of Link battles, the addition of Battle Frontier, as well as storyline and aesthetic changes. I really like this generation actually. It's also the last set of true 2D Pokemon games, but at the same time introduced a lot of new functions that became standard in later games. For me, Gen 1 and 2 games can feel a little old to play, but Gen 3 games feel much more contemporary. Generation 4. In 2007, Pokemon moved onto the Nintendo DS system with Diamond and Pearl. A lot of the new additions to the game were expected. Another new region called Sinnoh, based on Hokkaido, 88's Drift Club represent. Over 100 new Pokemon, more moves, changes to balance gameplay, that sort of thing. But the biggest addition, to me anyways, was the GTS, or Global Trade System. For the first time, it was possible to trade over the internet. I remember being so excited to be able to do that. It also made a lot of sense given that there were now almost 500 Pokemon at this point. It was also possible to obtain Pokemon from Generation 3, but that process was, to say the least, a pain. I know they tried to make it fun with the PAL Park and all that, but it feels more like a chore in my opinion. The second screen handles most of the menu, which is nice since it frees up the top screen, and there are no cumbersome or over-enthusiastic touch controls to worry about. A lot of DS games suffered from gimmicky controls, so thankfully that's not the case here. Platinum came out 2 years later and was the third game to Diamond and Pearl. I like the changes they made compared to the paired games. A couple of things have been made more convenient, like being able to ride your bike in the gatehouses, as well as the Poketch having the ability to scroll up and down through all the functions. Plus there's the whole Distortion World stuff, which I think is pretty cool. In 2010, the remakes of Gold and Silver were released, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The original games were already considered as possibly the best in the series, but the remakes managed to improve on them by adding all the goodies from Gen 3 and 4, as well as some new additions. It's great fun to re-explore all the familiar locations with the new graphics. The menu has been improved with nicer styling and bigger buttons to make touch controls a bit easier to use. And even though it makes no functional difference, I like that you can have one of your Pokemon following you around as you go about your business. Another cool addition is the Polka Walker, which was bundled together with Heart Gold and Soul Silver. You can transfer a Pokemon over to it via infrared, and as you walk around with it, the Pokemon inside will gain some experience. It's possible to battle, though as you might imagine, fights are very simplified. It's also a good way to get some items, and you can even catch Pokemon with it. Overall, Gen 4 was pretty awesome, and I have a tough time deciding whether I like the core games or remakes more. Generation 5. 2011 saw the introduction of a new set of core games, Pokemon Black and White, still on the DS. The new region is called Unova and loosely resembles New York and the surrounding area, apparently. They obviously wanted a new feel with these games, and it certainly succeeds, in my opinion. The graphics are even better with the animated sprites. I think they look great, despite other people complaining that the series still hasn't become completely 3D. The camera angles are a little bit more adventurous and move around depending where you're walking. I like that, makes the main city look really big, though that can make the player sprite look really tiny sometimes. Gen 5 adds a ton of new Pokemon, over 150 in fact. One of the reasons for that large amount of new ones are because none of the previous gen's Pokemon can be found until post-game, where you get the ability to transfer from Gen 4 games. I kind of like this, because that means every Pokemon you catch is new, and you don't have any familiar Pokemon to fall back on. Most of the new Pokemon were pretty cool, though I think Trubbish and Garbodor are questionable to say the least in terms of their design. A new feature I really liked are the seasons. Seasons change every month and cycle through spring, summer, autumn, and winter, as you might expect. Seasons affect the appearance of the environment, what wild Pokemon there are, as well as NPC locations and things like that. Some areas are only accessible during certain seasons as well. Triple battles and rotation battles kept things interesting in terms of the fighting, even for someone like me who's more interested in collecting. Only a year later, Black 2 and White 2 came out. For the first time, there was no third core game. These games take place 2 years after Black and White and are direct sequels. Black and White 2 expanded on the existing story of the previous paired games. There's a good sense of connectivity between the Gen 5 games, I think. The constant references towards the events of Black and White made me feel like I really had an impact on the world. Sounds a bit strange, I know, but that's how I felt. Another strange thing is that I felt a sense of nostalgia at the same time, even though I played the two games in immediate succession. Overall, I think Gen 5 brought the series into a different direction in terms of the storyline, and the fact the protagonist characters are a couple of years older gave everything a bit of a different atmosphere. Generation 6. 2013 was the year Pokemon said goodbye to the Nintendo DS and hello to the 3DS. Pokemon X and Y are the first games of the generation, and also the first games of the series that are in full 3D. Now, that's a pretty big change, and one that many people have been wanting to see for a while now. X and Y take place in a new region called Kalos, which is based on France. I think this may be one of my favorite regions, or at least tied with Sinnoh. Everything looks beautiful and vibrant, and each area and town within Kalos has its own distinct look. The characters, NPCs, and Pokemon are all very well rendered in 3D as well. For the first time, movement wasn't restricted to 4 directions, because you can use the analog stick. As an alternative to the bike, you also get roller skates, which allow you to access places that you normally can't. Some of the additions are Sky Battles, which are restricted to flying types, Pokemon Amie, which was a cool little minigame thing that gave us the ability to interact and play with Pokemon, Horde Encounters, which is where one Pokemon fights 5 wild Pokemon, a new type, which was Fairy, and Mega Evolutions. On top of that, there was also the ability to change up the appearance of the protagonist, including clothing, hair color, hairstyle, and things like that. Only a year later, the Game Boy Advance core series Ruby and Sapphire was remade into Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. The IGN review of these games is where the too much water meme comes from. As usual, the remakes improved the original games by adding gameplay mechanics from newer games that the originals lacked, but also by adding completely new things like the cosplay Pikachu and primal reversion for those games' legendaries, among other things like changes to the plot. Generation 7. In 2016, the release of Pokemon Sun and Moon marked the beginning of yet another generation. Of course, they take place in a new region. This one is called Alola. You can take a guess what that's based on. The region is split up into 4 different islands. Sun and Moon really changes things when it comes to how you progress through the game. So instead of the usual gym battles, you have to go and complete island challenges, which consists of various trials. Each trial has a trial leader who tells you what to do, which can range from fetching items and battling and things like that. In order to finish the quest, you have to battle a totem Pokemon, which is like a bigger version of a regular Pokemon. Upon completion, you get something called a Z Crystal, which is like a gym badge, except they can be used to power up Pokemon if held by them. Of course, there are more Pokemon as well, like in every generation, but some existing ones have received an alternate variant only found in Alola. For example, Persian looks like a regular Persian, but with silver fur and a fat face, and Dugtrio hilariously has blonde hair. I really like the concept they had with this, and hopefully we'll see more variants in the future. My favorites are the Ice-type Vulpix and Ninetales. Other improvements I like are the upgraded character models, more customization options for the player character, and the fact that you don't need HMs anymore. Poké Rides take care of all of that, so you don't need to carry around HM slaves like in the older games. As of this video, Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon haven't come out yet, but from the information we have available now, it looks like they won't be sequels, but rather alternate retellings of the Sun and Moon storyline. Judging from the trailers, there's going to be a lot of new content too. That concludes the overview of all the Pokemon generations to date, but now's the time where we decide which one can be considered the best. Since that's a totally subjective thing, all I can do is give an opinion and everyone will have their own reasons for preferring one gen over another. Can't really pick Gen 7 as my favorite, because we don't know if Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon are going to be the last games of that gen or not. Personally, I was torn between Gen 4 and 6, but in the end, I think Gen 4 is my favorite. I like the core games a lot. The Sinnoh region is one of my favorites, and while internet trading isn't supported anymore for those games, the addition of it was amazing. I like the story too, and then Heart Gold and Soul Silver provided tons of feel-good nostalgia while still being a new experience. Gen 6 is a close second. I really liked X and Y. I remember on launch day my best friend got X and I got Y after work. I walked down the street to his house and we started our games at the exact same time. We went through every patch of grass trying to catch everything we could, as well as trading game exclusives in order to complete our Pokédexes. I felt like a kid again. To me, it was the Pokemon game a lot of us wished for in the 90s. Despite racking up over 300 hours on Pokemon Y, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire didn't receive as much enthusiasm from me. Gen 5 gets an honorable mention because Black and White and Black and White 2 I thought had really good stories, and the seasons system, which I really liked. Hopefully you enjoyed taking a look at how Pokemon games evolved throughout the years. If you like what I do, consider subscribing and liking. And if you want to show some support and help out the channel, there's a Patreon link you can check out as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.